Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a 300-year-old poem that pretty much lays down the law for art. It asks a huge question. Is there really a right and a wrong way to judge creativity? Let's get into Alexander Pope's An Essay on Criticism.
Okay, so right out of the gate, Pope hits us with his single most important rule, the foundation for everything else he's going to say. To be a great artist, or even a great critic, you have to follow nature. But what he means by nature, well, it's probably not what you're thinking. So who was this guy anyway? Alexander Pope was basically a literary superstar in 18th century England. But here's the thing, he was also a total outsider. Because he was Catholic, he was legally barred from things like going to university or holding a government job. And that unique position, being on the outside looking in, gave him this incredibly sharp, critical eye that helped him become one of the defining voices of his age. So, in his essay, Pope sets up this epic battle that he saw at the heart of the art world. He framed it as a showdown between two massive ideas, the universal truth of nature versus the flashy, often superficial cleverness of human wit. And he presents these two as complete opposites. On one side, you've got nature. For Pope, this is the ultimate, divine, unchanging standard for all truth and beauty. And on the other side, you've got wit. That's our cleverness, our intelligence, which, yeah, it can be brilliant, but it can also be proud, small-minded, and really, really easy to corrupt.
So when Pope says nature, he's not just talking about trees and mountains. He means something way bigger. Think of it as the divine, harmonious, almost mathematical order of the entire universe. It was often called the great chain of being, where everything, from God all the way down to a single pebble, had its perfect place. This beautiful, logical system was the source of everything, the eternal rules for morality, for reason, and for art itself.
Wit, on the other hand, is that human spark of creativity. It's our amazing ability to make surprising connections and express ourselves cleverly. It's a powerful tool, for sure. But Pope issues a huge warning. If it's not guided and checked by the rules of nature, it just becomes a chaotic mess. You get art that's all flash and absolutely no substance.
So if flashy, undisciplined wit is just the symptom of bad art, what does Pope think is the root cause? What's the real disease that messes up both the artist and the person judging the art?
He poses this critical question, and it really gets to the very heart of why we so often get things wrong when we look at a piece of art or read a book. What is it that's really blinding us?
And his answer isn't a lack of education or not being smart enough. For Pope, the single greatest enemy of good judgment, the one thing he calls the never-failing vice of fools, is pride. That's it. It's the crack in the foundation of everything. Because think about what pride does. It makes us trust our own random opinions over universal truths. It makes us fixate on one clever line or one fancy detail, just the parts, instead of seeing the unified whole. It leads to these biased, extreme judgments because, honestly, we're more concerned with looking smart than with finding the actual truth in the art.
But Pope isn't just here to point out the problem. He actually offers a clear solution. He lays out a whole set of golden rules for how to create and judge art with humility and reason so we can finally get it right. And his advice is incredibly practical. First, know thyself. Basically, be aware of your own limits and don't try to be an expert on things you're not. Second, think about the author's goal. Judge the work based on what it's trying to be. Third, look at the whole thing, not just the little flashy parts. And finally, be a good person about it. A great critic needs a moral compass, not just good taste.
And here's the crucial idea. For Pope, the goal isn't to be shockingly original. The goal is to take a universal truth from nature, something we all recognize deep down, and just express it more perfectly and beautifully than anyone has before. True wit doesn't invent, it illuminates.
So you might be wondering, where did Pope come up with all these rules? Well, he would argue that he didn't invent them at all. He saw himself as just the latest person in a long, long tradition, rediscovering timeless ideas for his own time.
He really believed that the great classical writers, we're talking Aristotle, Horace, they didn't invent the rules of art. They just observed nature so carefully that they were the first to discover and organize its laws. The rules, he says, are just nature methodized.
And this leads him to a pretty powerful conclusion. If the ancient masters already figured out the laws of nature, then the most reliable way for us to follow nature is to follow them. For Pope, it's that simple. Copying the classics is copying nature. So Pope traces this whole history of wisdom. It starts with the ancient Greeks and Romans, then gets lost during what he calls the Dark Ages of superstition, and is finally rediscovered during the Renaissance. And he places himself right at the end of this timeline, as a key figure restoring this classical tradition in 18th century England. Okay, so after 300 years, what's the big takeaway for us today? In a world that often celebrates breaking all the rules, why should Pope's ideas about following them still matter?
The most important takeaway is this. Pope believed in one single universal standard. For him, great art wasn't about subjective taste or what you personally happen to like. It was about following timeless principles rooted in nature and reason.
You know, his essay is a powerful reminder that sometimes creativity works best within a structure, not in total chaos, that humility is way more important than just being clever, and that maybe the whole point of art is to connect us to something universally true. He's really teaching us to look past our own biases and see the work as a complete whole. And that leaves us with a challenging question for our own time, doesn't it? In our modern world, where my opinion is often treated as the final word, and all taste is seen as subjective, is there still any room for a universal standard of good art? Or has pride, the vice of fools, finally won?